The sound of crystal shattering around my face was almost polite. That was the first thing I remember thinking. How dainty it sounded for something that hurt so much. Stems snapped. Champagne flutes burst. Cold lobster and lemon butter smeared across my bare shoulder as my body slammed into the white linen table, then slid to the polished ballroom floor. For a second, all I could hear was the ringing in my left ear and the orchestra faltering on a wrong note. Then the silence hit. Hundreds of eyes. Senators, judges, socialites. All of them staring at me, the good little officer wife, the one who always smiled just the right amount in photos, now on my hands and knees in red silk, cheeks scorching where Adrian's hand had landed. My own husband stood over me, chest heaving, pupils blown wide, fingers still curled like the slap was stuck in them. Behind him, at the head of the Harrington table, Veronica barely concealed her satisfaction. One manicured hand rested on the back of her chair, the other loose at her side, where I knew she liked to press a certain point on Adrian's shoulder. The trigger spot, conditioned over months. I tasted copper. Not the first time I'd tasted my own blood. Afghanistan smelled like burned rubber and cordite. This ballroom smelled like truffle oil, expensive perfume, and the faint ozone of two bright chandeliers. I could have cried. I could have curled in on myself and apologized for making a scene like every script she'd written for me. Instead, I felt a slow, familiar calm drop over my nerves like a wet tarp over a fire. Combat calm. I pushed my palm into the slick smear of butter and broken glass, levered myself upright, and let a sound out of my throat that didn't feel like it belonged to the woman in the red dress. I laughed. Not hysterically, not high and wild, low, precise, controlled. I saw Agent Miller shift near the far wall, just another tall man in a dark suit to everyone else. His jaw clenched once. Veronica's eyes narrowed. Harper. Her voice cut through the stunned murmurs. Compose yourself. You're embarrassing Adrian. Embarrassing Adrian. The man who just backhanded me so hard a Navy dentist was going to have opinions about my molars. My cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, but my fingers had stopped shaking. I put one hand over my heart, feeling the cool metal of the brooch press into my skin through the silk. To them, it was a diamond snowflake, Adrian's birthday gift from his mother. To the FBI van 2 blocks away, it was a live wire. I smiled, teeth slick with the taste of iron, and tightened my thumb against the hidden switch. The tiny click was swallowed by the hum of the air conditioning. My apologies, I said, voice steady enough to make my old XO proud. I thought we were finished pretending. I looked straight at Veronica when I said it. Then I dipped my head, brought my lips closer to the brooch, and gave the line we'd rehearsed over lukewarm diner coffee and a grim handshake. It's done, I said softly. Take them. The orchestra stopped altogether. Phones began to vibrate across white-clothed tables, little rectangles lighting up hands and clutches. 1 buzz. 2. A wave. Screens bloomed with headlines and frozen stills, bank records, shell company diagrams, a video thumbnail of Dr. Whitley injecting clear fluid into a bag labeled with Adrian's name. Someone gasped. Someone else said, "Oh my God." I straightened, rolled my shoulders back as far as the bruise would let me, and walked out from behind the table like I was stepping onto a makeshift flight line, not a parquet floor. I had memorized this layout weeks ago. Exits, sight lines, where security tended to cluster during speeches and where they tended to sneak off to text their girlfriends. The Harrington Ballroom's double doors flew inward so hard one brass handle dented the paneling. Federal agents, nobody move! Blue windbreakers and tactical vests poured in like a tide. The chandeliers reflected off rifle optics and badge shields. A few of the Boston elite actually tried to stand between the agents and Veronica, as if money could stop a warrant. Agent Miller's voice cut through the chaos like a clean blade. "Veronica Harrington," he called, striding directly toward the head table. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, wire fraud, and the chemical restraint and abuse of a dependent adult." The room erupted, chairs scraped, high heels skidded on marble. Someone knocked over a champagne bucket. Ice water cascaded across the floor, seeping into the hem of my dress, turning the silk cold and heavy around my ankles. Adrian stared at his hands like he'd never seen them before. I could see the tremor starting in his right thumb, the one that always came when the drugs began to ebb. Sweat dampened his collar despite the chill blooming from the spilled ice. His gaze snapped up to mine, unfocused and horrified. I hit you, he whispered. Harper, Ma'am, a female agent said softly at my elbow, eyes flicking to the red welt on my cheek. Are you injured? Do you need medical? The part of me that had once curled up at the edge of our California couch, absorbing his mother's words about gratitude and knowing your place, wanted to say no, to minimize, to keep this from being too much. The part of me that had been Captain Cole in Kandahar, triaging under fire with blood on her boots, knew better. Yes, I said. Document it. He struck a federal officer on duty. The agent's pen halted mid-scribble. She looked at me properly for the first time, taking in the faint outline of ribbons still visible in the ruined photos on the slideshow screen. The way my posture didn't quite match the submissive reputation they'd cultivated for me. Army? She asked quietly. Logistics, I answered. Captain Cole? But tonight, I'm your complainant. Behind us, 2 agents flanked Adrian. He didn't resist. He just looked at his mother, eyes glassy. Mom, what's happening? He slurred, voice thick with sedatives and something like a terrified child. She ignored him. Do you know who I am? Veronica demanded of Miller, tone sharp enough to slice the air. You have no idea what you're doing. This is harassment. This is a long time coming, I cut in. Her head snapped toward me like I'd slapped her back. Harper, she hissed. You ungrateful little... Ma'am, Miller said flatly to her. You may want to save it for your arraignment. Everything in here is on tape. My cheek pulsed, heat radiating up into my temple. A shard of glass glittered in the melted butter near my heel. I stepped carefully around it and moved to the side of the room, away from the center of the breach. Years of training kept my breathing even as agents peeled off into teams. One to secure the server room, another to sweep the basement where I knew her charity records were stored. The chandelier seemed too bright now, every facet throwing back the chaos. Somewhere, a judge who'd once called me dear sat stone still, phone in hand, reading the same leaked files everyone else was seeing. Offshore accounts, faked invoices, diagnoses bought with wire transfers. Veronica's carefully curated empire was unraveling, one push notification at a time. My hands finally started to shake then, not from the slap, but from the sheer, overwhelming release of it all. Years of silence, pressed like sediment at the bottom of my chest, shifting in a slow tectonic slide as the room filled with badges instead of pearls. I pressed my palm flat against my sternum, feeling the tiny transmitter in the brooch dig into my skin. Same brooch. Different heart behind it. A camera flash went off somewhere. I turned my head slightly so the welt on my cheek was clearly visible. Let them see. They'd believed the Harrington story for years. Tonight, they could watch the real one in real time. I locked eyes with Veronica one last time as an agent snapped cuffs around her wrists. For the first time since I'd met her, she actually looked afraid. I gave her a small, humorless smile. Happy birthday to me, I said under my breath. It wasn't the line we'd scripted, but it felt right. Outside, sirens wailed closer, their rising and falling pitch threading through the classical music still piping faintly from speakers someone hadn't shut off yet. Inside, the dynasty I'd lived in like a gilded cage collapsed under the weight of its own paperwork. And I stood in the middle of it all, face stinging, dress sticky with champagne and blood, more solid, more myself than I had in 5 years. This wasn't where my story started. It sure as hell wasn't where it ended. People later asked me why I didn't just walk away. From the ballroom, from the marriage, from the mansion that had become more gilded cage than home. The real answer lived years earlier, in a much smaller room that smelled like rain and old paper. But before that, it lived in places that smelled like motor oil and dust, not caviar. I was not born into crystal and mahogany. I grew up in a house where the soundtrack was my dad's boots hitting the mat by the door and my mom's keys clinking in a chipped ceramic bowl. Army-based duplexes all have the same bones: thin walls, beige paint, and a porch light that flickers at the worst times. We didn't have old money. We had payday. I watched my parents trade duty stations and night shifts, so my brother and I never missed school, and there was always someone at the table. They taught me that logistics wasn't just a job, it was how you kept people alive. Where things were, when they arrived, who went without, that was power long before I had rank. When I commissioned, Dad hugged me so hard my ribs popped and whispered, "Make sure your people eat before you do." Kandahar smelled like burning trash and jet fuel. Convoys out to the fobs rattled my bones and left red dust in my teeth. Under fire, no one cared what my last name was. They cared that their ammo got there, their fuel didn't run out, and their mail made it through. I liked that kind of honesty, which is probably why Adrian Harrington looked so strange to me when I met him. A man from a world where nothing was ever said directly. He was charming in a way that didn't feel rehearsed, at least at first. We met at a fundraising gala for veterans nonprofits. I was there as a uniformed prop, basically, one of the real heroes trotted out between speeches. A donor in a too-tight tux laughed to his friend. "They clean up nice, don't they? Like a rescue dog in a bow tie." I'd smiled like I was trained to and taken a sip of bad champagne. Adrian heard it. He turned, sharp enough I could feel the air move, and said, loud enough for half the table to hear, "She's a captain, not a centerpiece. If you want to gawk at something, buy a painting." His mother's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly at the end of the table. That should have been a warning. Instead, I saw a man willing to push back in a room where money usually bought silence. He teased me about my combat boots hidden under the dress, listened when I talked about convoy routes and supply chains, and didn't flinch when I mentioned bodies. He said, "Our country," and meant it. When he asked me to marry him a year later in a chilly Boston park, my hands smelled like wool gloves and street pretzels. His ring was simple and heavy in my palm. The air tasted like snow. I said yes. The Harrington mansion smelled like lemon polish and restrained disapproval the first time I walked into it as his fiancée. Veronica wore cream. Always cream or beige or muted gold, never anything that might be mistaken for concession or warmth. She kissed my cheek without smudging her lipstick and said, "We are so proud of Adrian for choosing someone who understands service." It sounded like a compliment. It felt like a warning. There were portraits of dead men in naval whites and judicial robes on the wall, their eyes following me down the corridor like a court I hadn't asked for. Adrian held my hand a little tighter. "It's just a house," he whispered later in my ear as we stood in the marble foyer. "Ignore the ghosts." For a while, I could. Then the ghosts started prescribing medication. It didn't happen all at once. At first, it was little things. Veronica insisting we move into the mansion to save for our future. Her accidentally scheduling charity brunches over my drill weekends. Snide comments about my uniform being so severe. Then came the food. "Harper, darling, that's your second roll," she'd murmur in front of guests. "You know cameras add 10 pounds. We want you to look your best next to Adrian." I'd spent nights in Afghanistan eating cold MRE ravioli by headlamp on the hood of a Humvee. Sitting in that dining room, pushing asparagus around my plate under crystal light, I felt hungrier than I ever had downrange. Adrian started having episodes not long after we moved in. Panic attacks, Veronica called them. Nightmares. "Family history of instability," she added, eyes flicking to me like I should know I'd married defective stock. She produced Dr. Thomas Whitley like a magician revealing a dove. "Concierge medicine," she explained, touching Adrian's arm. "He only takes a few clients. We're lucky. Little white pills, then little blue ones, then drops in his scotch at night. He slept a lot, he flinched less. He stopped arguing with his mother about things that had once mattered to him, which charities the trust supported, how often we saw my parents, whether we could ever move out. He stopped laughing at my dumb convoy stories. He stopped asking. The first time he raised his voice at me, he looked as surprised as I felt. The second time, he didn't. Every time he snapped, there was a shadow of triumph at the end of the table where Veronica sat. "Stress," Whitley said, hands folded, pen smooth on the page. "He's under a lot of pressure. We'll adjust his doses." To them, his mind was a spreadsheet to be balanced. The inheritance was the only line item that mattered. My world shrank to polished floors, controlled meals, and Veronica's voice in my ear. "I worry about you," she said one night as we stood in her dressing room, the air thick with perfume and fabric steam. "All that war, all that pressure, you seem unsteady sometimes." Adrian and I talked. If you ever have a breakdown, we'll take care of you. A clinic, somewhere private. You won't have to think at all. She smiled. I thought of the restraints I'd seen in Afghan psych wards. The distant, over-medicated eyes. I'm fine, I said. She patted my arm like a child. Of course you are, dear. For now. That night, I sat on the edge of the guest room bed, the one that was always available to me when Adrian was too sedated to notice anything, and realized I had crossed an invisible line. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a piece on her board. The thunderstorm that changed everything started like any other Boston storm. A low grumble over the harbor, the smell of ozone sneaking in around window panes older than half the judges on Veronica's donor lists. Lightning cracked so close the chandeliers flickered. Somewhere behind the walls, the security system choked. The mansion sighed. I was in the upstairs hall, barefoot, the polished wood cool under my soles, when I heard the faint double beep and a click that sounded wrong. I knew the sound of mechanical failure, trucks backfiring, generators stuttering, and I'd heard every locked door in this house open and close enough times to know their music. The red LED on Veronica's private study door winked out. In its place, a soft green glow. It lasted maybe 90 seconds. I know because I counted. 60 to blink, decide, and move. 30 to slip down the hall and turn the knob. The study smelled like old leather and printer ink, a denser, more masculine version of the rest of the house. Shelves lined the walls full of books that had never been cracked and binders that had. I closed the door behind me, heart thudding loud in the sudden quiet. On the desk lay neat stacks of paper, a glass paperweight glinting in the occasional lightning flash, and a slim, cream folder marked with a single word in Veronica's handwriting. Adrian. I hesitated a full 10 seconds. If this had been a Target building, I would have been yelling at any soldier under me for standing in the doorway that long. I shut the curtains, killing the lightning glare, and opened the folder. I expected MRI scans, lab reports, maybe some family doctor notes about anxiety. What I saw instead made the skin between my shoulder blades go cold. No diagnoses, no symptoms, no independent specialist reports, just charts, dates and dosages, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, sleep aids. Under notes, in a tight, precise hand, more compliant today, less resistance. Argument stopped after trigger phrase. Optimal level, maintain. Trigger phrase. My mind flipped back through the last year and a half. The way her hand squeezed his shoulder, the low murmur in his ear, the way his jaw slackened and his eyes went flat before he nodded and did exactly what she wanted. The world narrowed to the sound of my own breathing and the tick of the antique clock on the wall. Behind that file were others, a ledger with shell companies feeding small, regular payments into Whitley's account. Another with donation adjustments that looked a lot like laundered trust money. Even one with my name on a tab. Harper Cole, monitor. I snapped a few rapid photos with my phone, my pulse pounding in my fingertips. The thunder outside rolled like artillery as the house's systems stuttered back to life. The LED on the hall side of the door blinked crimson again. I slid the file back exactly as I'd found it, stepped out, and pulled the door shut against the soft, relocking click. My cheek wasn't bruised back then. Not yet. But some deeper part of me was. I patted down the hall on numb feet and paused outside our bedroom door. Adrian lay on top of the covers, shoes still on, tie loose, lips parted in a drugged half snore. Lightning flashed across his face, showing the boyish lines underneath the slackness. He twitched, mumbling something I didn't catch. I thought of boarding a plane in the morning. Europe, maybe? Or home to my parents' tiny place, let them wrap me in normal and tell me I wasn't crazy. I also thought of the soldiers I'd watched go down in the valley, and the ones we'd gone back for, even when it hurt. Never leave a comrade behind, my first platoon sergeant had drilled into us, his voice gravel and cigarette smoke. I leaned my forehead against the bedroom doorframe, the varnish cool against my skin, and made my decision. I wasn't leaving him here, in this house, in this drugged half-life with a mother who saw him as a lockbox to crack. If I ran, she'd win. If I stayed and let her break me, she'd win. So I chose the third option, the one the Harringtons never saw coming. I chose to fight. But not their way. Mine. The next morning, I turned a linen closet into a war room, The linen closet smelled like starch and lavender when I turned it into a war room. It was halfway down the servants' corridor, wedged between the back stairwell and a guest room no one important ever used. Veronica considered it below notice, which made it perfect. I pulled out stacks of monogram sheets, folded towels, sachets that cost more than my first dress blues, and set them neatly on the hallway floor. Then I slid a compact, military-grade laptop from my duffel, the one piece of my old life I'd refused to store, and set it on the lowest shelf. The screen's glow against the white-painted walls felt almost obscene. This was where I had once hidden to cry quietly after another little correction about my posture, my fork, my everything. Now it was my skiff. Not officially, of course. No classified documents, no sensitive networks, just a stripped-down machine with encrypted drives, an air-gapped connection, and every ounce of discipline the Army had ever taught me about handling evidence. I taped a cheap power strip along the baseboard and ran the cord under the closet door, where it vanished against the thick runner. Veronica would never kneel down far enough to see it. People who live above everything rarely look at the floor. Every night, once the house went quiet and Adrian's breathing settled into that drugged, unnatural rhythm, I'd slip into that closet, close the door, and loan my eyes to the system. I photographed everything: ledgers from her foundations, scans of Whitley's bogus prescriptions, screenshots of bank transfers that hopped through 3 islands before landing in consultancy fees. The rugged keyboard clicked softly under my fingers as I labeled each file: date, source, relevance. The air grew warm and dry in there, smelling less like lavender and more like plastic and dust. Evidence doesn't care about feelings, it just waits for someone to use it. Weeks blurred into months. Outwardly, I was the perfect Harrington wife, smiling at fundraisers, pouring coffee for judges, pretending not to hear the way people described me. "She's plucky," one senator's wife whispered once. "From the Army," another added, like it was a faint disease. Veronica would lay her hand on my arm and murmur, "She's adjusting," like I wasn't standing right there. Inside, in the linen closet, I was building something they had no vocabulary for. A case. I needed help that didn't belong to this house. That came from Dane. We'd done one tour together, years back, before I knew what it felt like to sleep under silk instead of army wool. Back then, he'd been Special Agent Miller from CID, the guy who cared about missing equipment more than most commanders cared about missing people. He was the one who'd taught me that receipt trails win fights long after fists and bullets are spent. After the thunderstorm night, after the file marked Adrian and the ledger that spelled out medical abuse in clean black ink, I found his old number buried in my contacts. I stared at it for 3 whole minutes at the kitchen island while the espresso machine hissed in the background. Then I texted, "Need to talk. Off the record, then very on." He replied in less than 30 seconds. "Name the diner." We met in a place that smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil, the kind of sticky Formica joint no Harrington would be caught dead in. I wore jeans and a hoodie and tucked my hair into a ball cap, a little too aware of how different the fluorescent light felt on my skin compared to crystal chandeliers. Dane slid into the booth across from me, the vinyl squeaking under his weight. "Cole," he said, giving me the once-over. "You look like hell." "Thanks," I answered. "House training?" He didn't smile, but his eyes softened for half a second. "Start at the top," he said, taking out a small notebook and an FBI-branded pen he pretended not to notice. I told him about the closet, about the ledger, about Whitley's prescriptions that read like a chemical lobotomy plan. I kept my voice low, steady, like I was briefing him on a convoy route through IED country. When I got to the part about Veronica threatening a clinic for my own good, his jaw clenched. "You think she'd do it?" he asked. "I think she already has a doctor who'll sign anything if the check clears," I said. "If I don't play along, she'll flip the narrative. Crazy captain, PTSD, unstable wife." He nodded once. "Evidence?" he asked. I slid a compact across the table, a fancy makeup thing Veronica had given me one Christmas, now hollowed out. He popped the powder tray with his thumbnail. A micro SD card winked up at us, black and unremarkable. "Copy of the copy," I said. "Original stays in my closet. Cloud backup in a place you'd approve of." Dane huffed once, his version of a laugh. Paranoid suits you, he said, then added more serious. There's enough for fraud here. Money laundering. Maybe RICO if we can map the shell companies right. But the medical abuse, he tapped the compact. That's trickier. Because he doesn't know what she's doing to him, I said. Because he's technically consenting on paper, Dane replied. Even if he's drugged to the gills, the doctors have cover. We need something on tape. And we need exigent circumstances to keep her from shipping him to some offshore clinic the second she smells trouble. I thought of the way she'd looked at me holding that Adrian file, the cold calculation I'd glimpsed in her eyes every time he showed a flicker of rebellion. She's already test-flying that idea, I said. She's mentioned retreats in Switzerland, quiet places. So we don't tap her on the shoulder until we're ready to break both arms, Dane said. The waitress set down 2 chipped mugs of coffee. The steam curled between us, carrying the smell of burnt beans and dish soap. How? I asked. He hesitated, turning the mug between his palms. Harper, there's one way to get a warrantless raid inside that fortress tonight, he said. But you're not going to like it. I raised an eyebrow. Downrange, you asked me to bring MPs into a firefight because a contractor slapped one of your soldiers, he reminded me. You remember what you said? I did. If you hit one of mine in uniform, you hit the army. He nodded. Same thing stateside. You're a federal officer. If one of them assaults you on tape, in front of witnesses with a wire running, we can move fast. We combine that with your evidence, we walk into that house with enough probable cause to flip every drawer before she can blink. I knew what he was asking. I also knew what it meant to walk willingly into contact. Let her hurt me, I said flatly. On purpose. He looked me dead in the eye. Let her do what she's already doing, he said. But this time, you turn it into the opening volley instead of the last straw. The fluorescent bulb above us flickered. I thought of my parents' kitchen back home, my father's calloused hand on my shoulder the day I left for basic. You don't start fights, he'd said. You finish them. I'm not letting him rot in that house, I said. Dane's knuckles whitened around his mug. Then we plan it, he said. We control everything we can. Timing, placement, coverage. You say the word, we come through the door, but I need you to understand, once this starts, your life on that side of the river is over. No going back to maybe it's not so bad. I thought of the Adrian I'd first met, laughing in a parking lot. The one who'd told his mother to respect the uniform the night we got engaged. I thought of the man who now stared through me at dinner like he was trying to remember why I was there. My life on that side of the river has been over for a while, I said quietly. This just makes it official. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. One word was written in block letters. Done. That's your code, he said. You say it into the wire, my team moves. Until then, we're ghosts. You get one shot at this clean. Use it when there's no doubt. Understood? Understood, I answered. Outside, snow flurries had started to drift past the diner's greasy windows, soft against the harsh city light. I slipped the compact back into my purse, paid for our coffees and crumpled ones, and walked out into the sharp Boston cold with the taste of burnt beans and inevitability in my mouth. Said. The morning of my birthday gala, Veronica supervised the staff like a general before a parade. The house smelled like flowers and roasting beef, candles and polish. In the dressing room, steam from the garment steamer fogged the mirrored closet doors. My army dress blues hung on a padded hanger, crisp and perfect. Or they had, until one of Veronica's nervous staff tripped and dumped an entire pot of coffee over them. Oh, Harper, she cooed when I stepped in and saw the dark stain blooming over the jacket. What a pity. They just aren't made for real life, are they? She clucked her tongue and snapped her fingers. A garment bag appeared. I had something else prepared, she said. For a special occasion. You'll look lovely. Inside was a floor-length beige gown that matched her idea of perfection. Demure neckline, no sparkle, the exact color of surrender. I ran the silk through my fingers. It felt cold and slick, like snakeskin. Thank you, I said, because there was a microphone in the light fixture and a camera in the smoke detector, and the persona of obedient daughter-in-law was still useful for a few more hours. She kissed my cheek. "Try not to frown tonight," she said lightly. "We want people to see how happy you make my son." When she left, closing the door with a soft click, I held the beige gown up in front of the mirror and stared at the reflection. I saw a ghost. Underneath, my face looked older than 32. Fine lines at the corners of my mouth from holding my smile just so. A faint hardness in my eyes from holding my tongue too long. I hung the beige on the back of the closet door, then knelt and pulled out a different garment bag I'd hidden weeks earlier behind Adrian's unused hiking gear. The zipper hissed like a secret. The dress inside was the kind of red that made Veronica's lips thin when she saw it in magazines. Not a Harrington red. My red. I bought it myself on a day when I'd sneaked off to a simple boutique on Newbury Street between charity meetings. I'd paid cash. I'd twirled once in the fitting room when no one was looking, the fabric soft and heavy around my legs, and thought, this is what it feels like to choose yourself. I stepped into it now. The lining was cool against my skin at first, then warmed as I pulled the zipper up. The weight settled over my hips, grounding. The color made the bruises on my sole feel less lonely. At the vanity, I pinned my hair up, not in the sleek chignon Veronica preferred, but in a looser knot that felt more like the way I'd worn it under helmets. I kept the makeup simple. Liner, mascara, lipstick the color of fresh raspberries. Nothing she could accuse of being gaudy, just enough to make my face mine again. Then I took the brooch from its velvet box. The stones caught the light, scattering cold fire across the vanity table. The text had been delicate when they wired it, tiny fingers inserting microphone and transmitter without disturbing the outer glamour. To anyone else, it was just another Harrington bauble. To me, it was a lifeline. I pinned it over my heart, exactly where Dane had shown me to get the best audio. The metal was cool through the thin layers of dress and skin. I looked at myself one more time. Bare shoulders, red silk, bruise already blooming faintly yellow at the edge of an old stress bite on my lip from grinding my teeth in my sleep. "Captain Cole," I told the woman in the mirror under my breath, using the name that still fit better than Mrs. Harrington. "We're on mission." Downstairs, I could hear the first guests arriving. Muffled greetings, the clink of glasses, the low hum of money assembling itself. I straightened, rolled my shoulders, and left the beige gown hanging alone on the door like a shed skin. When I stepped onto the marble landing, the chandelier light flooded over me. A few staff members looked up, eyes widening just a fraction at the color I'd chosen. Veronica was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, an expression of frozen surprise cracking her perfect poise for half a second. "Harper," she said, tone cool enough to frost the rail. "That's unexpected." "Thank you," I said. "So is tonight." Her gaze flicked to the brooch, then back to my face. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd moved into this house, I watched her choose not to make a scene in front of arriving guests. Small victories add up. I walked past her into the ballroom as the orchestra struck its first note, and the chandeliers glittered like stars over a battlefield I'd mapped down to the last inch. Somewhere 2 blocks away, a van full of federal agents listened to my heartbeat through a tiny wire. Somewhere closer, my husband's pills waited by his place setting, their dosage just a hair higher tonight, as Veronica had ordered. She thought she was tightening her control. She had no idea she was priming the fuse. The ballroom smelled like money and gardenias. Strings floated under the murmur of conversation, crystal chimed, and the floor under my heels felt too slick, like polished ice. 100 people turned to look as Veronica let us in for the first toast, her in silver, Adrian in black tie, me in red. "Smile wider," she whispered through her teeth. "You look intense." "I am," I said quietly. She didn't catch the warning. Adrian's hand rested in the crook of my elbow, warm and a little clammy. His pupils were already larger than they should have been for the soft lighting. The vitamin Whitley had given him that afternoon was doing its work. "You okay?" I asked under my breath. "Just tired," he murmured. "Mom says I should pace myself." "Right." I kept my face neutral as we took our seats at the long horseshoe table. A row of senators, judges, old money, and old secrets stretched to my left. Charity board members and nervous staff on my right. The orchestra slid into a softer piece. Veronica stood, tapped her spoon against her water glass. The sharp ring cut through the music and chatter, making shoulders twitch. "Friends," she said, voice smooth as cream. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate our Harper." Our, not hers, not mine. Our, as in possession. "She has brought such spirit to our family," Veronica continued, letting the pause hang just a fraction too long. "Even if she sometimes forgets the difference between a battlefield and a ballroom." There was scattered polite laughter. I felt the wire in my brooch vibrate faintly against my skin as I breathed. "Tonight," she went on, "we also mark a transition. My son's health requires stability, responsibility. So, to protect him from stress," she glanced at me, "and other influences, he and I have agreed that I will assume his power of attorney regarding all family business." The words dropped like stones into the room. At the far end of the table, a senator's wife coughed into her napkin. A judge shifted in his chair. Somewhere behind me, a chair leg scraped faintly against the parquet as someone adjusted position, the sound too loud in my ears. Veronica smiled wider. "Don't worry," she cooed. "It's just a formality. Nothing changes for my dear daughter-in-law. She will continue to charm us with her unique background and service stories." I felt every eye on my uniform ribbon that wasn't there, on the red silk that shouldn't have been. She lifted her glass. "To Harper," she said, "who we welcomed in even when she didn't quite fit the mold." They drank. I didn't. Under the table, I dug my nails into my palm until I felt the quick, grounding pain. Dane's voice echoed in my head. "You say it when there's no doubt. Not yet." Courses came and went. Lobster, lamb, a dessert that looked like art and tasted like sugar. I kept my face smooth, smile polite, hands steady. Veronica watched me from the head of the table like a hawk watches a mouse that hasn't realized it's exposed. When the last dish was cleared, the orchestra shifted to a waltz. Couples rose and swirled under the chandeliers. Veronica tilted her head toward Whitley, who was pretending to enjoy the music at the corner of the room. He gave a nearly invisible nod, fingers brushing his tie knot. She reached for Adrian's wrist and pressed 2 fingers into the inside of his elbow, the exact spot I'd seen her use before. Her nails looked delicate. The grip was not. "Up, darling," she murmured. "Time to show everyone how we handled disobedience." His chair scraped back. He stood too fast for a man who'd had 3 glasses of wine. The room felt the wrongness before anyone could name it. Conversations faltered. The music seemed to recede behind a curtain of cotton. I watched his face. His eyes were wide and glassy, not like when he laughed freely, not like when we lay on the couch watching bad movies. His jaw hung slightly slack, shoulders squared in a way that was too rigid for him. "Adrian," I said softly. "Sit down." Veronica's voice slid under mine, low and precise. "Adrian, listen to me, not to her." He turned. Not towards her, towards me. Conversations died completely now. Forks hovered above plates. The only sounds were the orchestra's strained strings and the soft whir of the ceiling fans. He walked around the inside of the table, step after step, thudding dully in my chest. People slid their chairs in, making a path, eyes darting between us. "Adrian," I repeated louder. "Look at me." Nothing. He stopped 1 pace away, so close I could smell the faint mix of cologne and whatever chemical fog wrapped his nervous system. There was a flicker in his gaze, a tiny flash like a pilot light trying to catch. "Harper," he whispered, voice raw. Veronica's hand twitched. "Now," she said, barely audible. "Show her what happens when she forgets her place." His hand moved faster than thought. The slap cracked across my cheek with a white-hot burst of sound and stars. My head whipped sideways and my body followed, colliding with the banquet table. Glass shattered under my shoulder. Something cold and wet, wine maybe, soaked into my hair and the red silk as cutlery clattered onto the floor. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The underside of the tablecloth smelled like spilled butter and dust. My cheek burned, a pulsing, shocking heat. Somewhere far away, someone gasped. A chair fell over. Whitley muttered something that sounded like sedation, but never got the chance. In that small, suspended space between impact and reaction, my training kicked in the way it always had. Assess, orient, decide, act. Adrian had hit me, on command, in front of federal judges, state senators, donors who sat on boards that answered to government agencies. I was in a formal dress, not a uniform. But I was still a captain. I sucked in a breath, tasted copper and sugar and humiliation. Then I started laughing. It came out low at first, a short huff that made a few people flinch. I pushed myself up, crystal crunching under my palms, and let the laugh grow as I straightened. Heads turned. If anyone had looked closely, they would have seen that the sound came from somewhere behind my ribs, not from amusement. I touched my cheek gently. My fingers came away streaked with wine and a tiny smear of blood where his ring had caught my lip. I turned to face the room. Silence. Veronica's eyes were wide now, a single muscle jumping in her jaw. "Harper," she started. I cut her off. "Thank you," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. My voice didn't shake. "That was exactly what I needed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I placed my fingers lightly on the brooch. It felt like a heartbeat. Into the tiny mic, I said clearly, "It's done." Then louder, for everyone, "Take them." Phones around the room chimed and buzzed almost simultaneously, a bizarre digital chorus that made people flinch harder than the slap had. Screens lit faces an eerie blue as headlines flashed. Accounts frozen. Shell companies exposed. Dr. Whitley's prescriptions scrolling across notifications. Someone swore. Someone else dropped their phone. The chandeliers trembled as the front doors slammed open. "Federal agents! Everyone stay where you are!" The sound of boots on marble rode under the shout. Men and women in FBI windbreakers and dark suits poured into the ballroom, MP armbands among them. The air shifted from perfume and candle wax to gun oil and cold outside air. For a surreal second, I saw the scene from above. Red dress, broken glass, Veronica in silver, Adrian swaying, his hand still half raised. A lifetime's worth of power dynamics, flipping like a coin in slow motion. Then Dane's voice cut through it, sharp and anchored. "Veronica Harrington," he called over the stunned guests, badge held high. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, tax fraud, and the chemical restraint and assault of a federal officer." Gasps. A chair tipped. Someone sobbed once. "Officer, this is absurd," Veronica snapped, color draining from her face. "You can't." "We can," Dane said, already moving. "And we will." Two agents took her by the arms. She tried to yank free, but they were trained, steady, indifferent to brand names. Her bracelet clinked against the cuffs. "Harper," she hissed as they turned her toward the door. "Look at what you've done." "I did. Finally," I said. Behind her, two MPs flanked Dr. Whitley, relieving him of his leather case. Pill bottles rattled inside as he cursed under his breath about privacy and patients' rights. Adrian sank to his knees beside the broken glass, hands shaking. The fight had drained out of him along with whatever chemical surge had driven the slap. His eyes found me through the chaos, huge and horrified. Did I? His voice cracked. "Harper, did I hit you?" I looked down at him, my face throbbing in time with my pulse. "Yes," I said softly. "But it wasn't your hand I came for tonight." An agent brushed past, the edge of his windbreaker whispering against my arm. Somewhere in the back, a senator slipped toward the exit and was gently redirected by a patient agent. The House staff huddled near the kitchen doors, white aprons stark against the dark wood, eyes huge. The orchestra had stopped playing. One violinist held her instrument to her chest like a fragile shield. The Harrington Ballroom had become what it always really was, a stage where fear and money traded masks, only now the backdrop had changed. Now the law was in the room. I stood in the center of it, cheek burning, red silk clinging damply to my side, brooch still humming faintly against my skin. And for the first time since I walked into this house, I wasn't the one on trial. The sirens faded into a distant wail by the time the last FBI jacket disappeared through the doorway. What remained was the sound of breathing. The guests exhaled in ragged, uneven patterns like a platoon after contact. Glass crunched under shifting shoes, chairs scraped as people slowly remembered they had legs. I stood still. My cheek ached in a deep, pulsing way now. The adrenaline spike was ebbing, leaving behind a fine tremor in my fingers and a metallic taste in my mouth. Captain Cole? Dane's voice came from my left, steady as ever. I turned. He was closer now, badge clipped, sidearm holstered, expression softened around the edges in a way it hadn't been when he read the charges. You good to stand? He asked quietly, just for me. I've been hit harder, I said. But yes. His gaze flicked to my cheek anyway. We'll get you checked by the med team in the van. It matters how this looks in the report. Trust me, I said. It looks very clear from where I'm standing. Behind him, 2 agents walked Dr. Whitley past us, his perfect hair slightly askew, mouth moving in frantic whispers. I caught one phrase, I have influential patients, before the door swallowed him. Good. Let him try that line on a federal magistrate. At the edge of the room, Adrian still knelt on the parquet, hands limp at his sides. An EMT had slid an oxygen mask under his chin and was checking his pupils with a pen light. He looked up when I started toward him. Harper! He choked. Oh God, Harper, I'm so sorry. I don't even remember standing up. The EMT glanced between us, then stepped back half a pace, giving us space but staying close. Protocol. I crouched, ignoring the pull of the torn silk at my hip. Listen to me, I said, keeping my voice low, anchored. What happened tonight is on her, and on Whitley, not on you. But what happens next, that's on you. His eyes flooded. Are you leaving me? That arrow still found a soft spot. I'm getting you out of this house, I said. To a real hospital, with real doctors, not ones on her payroll. After that, you get to choose who you are without her hand on your spine. His fingers twitched toward mine, then stopped, hovering. Will you be there? He asked. I wanted to lie, to tell him yes, I'd sit by every hospital bed, hold every vomit bag, walk every step of rehab with him. The part of me that had carried orphaned supplies across Kandahar wanted to say I would carry him too. But I had promised myself, standing in that skiff closet 3 years ago, that I would not trade one cage for another. I'll help you get started, I said. I'll make sure you have a good lawyer and a doctor who gives you facts, not pills. But your mother's control doesn't get to move into my body. I am not your new leash. He flinched, then nodded slowly, as if each movement hurt. I don't deserve you, he whispered. No, I said. You don't. But you deserved better than what she did. We both did. Behind us, the murmur of the crowd thickened. People sharing what they'd just seen, spinning each other's shock into something they could live with. A senator's aide whispered about optics. A judge muttered to a colleague about recusals. Dane leaned over the EMT. Get him to Mass General. Full talk screen, chain of custody on all samples. Bilateral coordination with DOD legal. He caught my eye. You're listed as complainant and victim, Harper. That comes with rights. I know, I said. Write it clean. I stood carefully. My knees complained, my cheek throbbed. The wire in the brooch crackled as someone on the other end cut the channel. Veronica's place at the head of the table sat empty now, cloth pristine except for a single, overturned champagne flute, its contents slowly spreading into the embroidered runner. Her chair looked smaller without her in it. A housekeeper edged toward me, clutching a folded towel. Ma'am, she whispered. For your face. Her hands shook. Mine didn't when I took it. Thank you, I said. You okay? Her eyes filled. She nodded, lips pressed tight. We saw things, she murmured. We thought no one would believe us. They will now, I said. If anyone tries to lean on you, call Agent Miller. Or call me. She blinked rapidly. Yes, ma'am. As she retreated, I caught my reflection in one of the floor-to-ceiling windows. The woman staring back looked like a crime scene photo. Smudged lipstick, hair mussed, cheek red and swollen, red gown streaked with food and wine. But under that, in the set of her jaw and the directness of her gaze, I saw the captain who used to stare down convoy briefings and say, "We're going anyway." I dabbed my cheek with the towel, wincing. "Captain Cole," a new voice said behind me, formal. "We'll need your full statement once the scene is secure." I turned to see a military police captain, dark hair scraped back, notebook in hand. "Of course," I said. "I've been narrating this night for 3 years. I can give you chapter and verse." She almost smiled. "We're very interested in your closet workspace." "So is Veronica's defense team," I said dryly. "Or they will be." As the last guests were led toward the exits for questioning, I felt the weight of the house shift. The walls seemed to exhale. The chandeliers felt less like spotlights and more like just lights. Dane came back, jaw tight but eyes softer now. "You did it," he said simply. "I did my part," I corrected. "You did yours. The evidence did the rest." He nodded once, approving. "You're going to need somewhere to sleep," he said. "Preferably one that doesn't come with a press corps." "I've slept in worse than a motel," I said. "But I have a place. I kept one foot out the door for a reason." He cocked his head. "You really planned all the way down to your exit, huh?" I looked back at the wreck of the Harrington ballroom. Glittering, broken, noisy, and finally honest. "In my world, you never go into a hot zone without a way out," I said. Tonight was no different. My cheeks still burned. My heart still raced. My hands still remembered the feel of Adrian's tremor. But somewhere under the ache, under the adrenaline dump, a quieter feeling took root. Not victory. Something sharper. Something cleaner. Relief. And as I followed the MP captain toward a side room for my statement, I realized the strangest part of all. The real mission had started the moment the slap landed, but it wouldn't end with Veronica's mugshot. What came next would be mine to build from scratch. The courthouse smelled like old paper and burnt coffee instead of gardenias. Months had sanded the sharpest edge off my bruise, but every time I stepped through the security scanner, my cheek buzzed with phantom heat. Muscle memory, I told myself, not a prophecy. I sat in the last row that day. No red dress, no glitter, just a dark blazer, hair pulled back, the wired brooch long since retired to the back of a drawer. I wasn't there as decor or bait anymore. I was there as what the docket called me, primary witness and whistleblower. Veronica shuffled in wearing chains instead of diamonds. The first time I'd seen her in orange, it had almost been funny. Now, under the fluorescent lights and the watchful stare of the court, it just looked sad. Not pity sad. Wasted life sad. She scanned the room, expected the world to orbit her one more time, and flinched when her gaze hit me. I didn't look away. The judge read the charges in a flat practice tone. RICO violations, money laundering, tax fraud, illegal medical experimentation, assault on a federal officer. Each count sounded less like an accusation and more like a ledger being balanced. The prosecutors played snippets of my recordings. Whitley's hushed voice prescribing cooperative doses. Veronica's cool instructions about trust distributions. Adrian's faint, slurred protests. Then they played the ballroom. The sound of that slap echoed differently in this room, tinny through the speakers, stripped of chandeliers and applause. My laugh followed, then my voice, steady and clear. "It's done. Take them." I watched the jurors' faces as they listened. Some winced. One clenched her jaw, hand tightening around a pen. The verdict came faster than anyone expected. "Guilty on all counts." The words landed like a final gavel on a very old table. Veronica's shoulders sagged for the first time since I'd met her. The mask slipped. Underneath was not a mastermind, not a matriarch, just a brittle woman who decided control was easier than love and never course-corrected. Her attorney murmured something about appeals. She didn't look back my way again. Life without parole. I exhaled slowly. Not triumph, just completion. A file finally marked closed instead of pending. Afterward, in the hallway, reporters clustered near the doors, held back by court officers. Microphones bobbed, questions ricocheted. "Captain Cole, how long did you know? Did you stay just to bring them down? Do you feel safe now?" I gave the same answer over and over. I did what any soldier does, I said. I identified a threat, documented it, and called for backup. The rest is the justice system doing its job. They wanted something bloodier, something more glamorous. They got the truth instead. Outside, the February air slapped my face harder than Veronica ever had. It smelled like exhaust and salt from the harbor. A man waited by the steps, hands shoved into a plain jacket, hair longer, face thinner. No design or anything. No entourage. Adrian. He looked smaller without the dynasty wrapped around him, but more real than I'd seen him in years. Hey, he said, voice tentative. You always did have a flair for timing. Court clocks are ruthless, I replied. They don't care about anyone's dinner plans. We stood there, a small island in a sea of passing suits and winter coats. How's Vermont? I asked. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. Cold, honest. Nobody cares about my last name. They care if I show up to group and wash my own dishes. That's an upgrade, I said. He sobered. I remember more now, pieces of nights. Things I said, things I did. His eyes flicked to my cheek, even though the bruise was long gone. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for... Don't make what you did an excuse to stay sick, I cut in gently. Yep. You hit me. You also signed documents you didn't understand, ignored red flags, let yourself be managed. Those are things you can work on. But I won't live in that slap forever. Neither should you. He swallowed hard, nodded. I wrote you, he said. Did you? I read it, I said. Thank you for thanking me without asking me to come back. A fragile smile tugged at his mouth. You always were better with logistics than I was, he said. I'm glad you blew it up, Harper. Not just for me, for every nurse and maid and cousin who got stepped on in that house. Good, I said. Then let that be the last thing we agree on for a while. Go build something that's yours. He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. Quick, careful, more like a soldier than a socialite. It felt like closing a chapter, not reopening it. Take care, Captain, he said, stepping back. You too, I replied. He walked away without looking over his shoulder. For once, I didn't watch to see if he tripped. A week later, the whistleblower check arrived. It came in a bland envelope, as if it were a phone bill instead of a number that could have bought me a yacht, a brownstone, and a closet full of dresses that never needed to see a courtroom. I sat at my kitchen table, my own kitchen, in my own rented apartment with mismatched mugs and a chipped countertop, and stared at the commas. I thought about my parents' little house where there was never quite enough, but always a spare chair at the table. I thought about the women at the VA waiting room, telling stories in low voices about uncles skimming benefits, husbands hiding debt, parents using their GI Bill refunds. I thought about the skiff closet and the nights I'd whispered into the wire, not just for myself, but for every person trapped in a gilded cage with no training and no backup. When I finally picked up the pen, my hand didn't shake. Operation Freedom Fund, I wrote on the form. Purpose: legal aid, emergency housing, forensic accounting for service members and spouses trapped in financially and emotionally abusive families. I registered the nonprofit using the same discipline I'd used to plan convoys: mission, logistics, contingencies. Dane recommended a good accountant. My old CO sent an email blast that filled my inbox with stories and volunteers in less than a week. Our first client was a Navy spouse whose in-laws had borrowed her VA loan. The second was an enlisted Marine whose parents had opened 5 credit cards in his name while he was deployed. The third was a retired master sergeant whose adult daughter had drained his pension. Different details, same battlefield. We didn't kick down doors with MPs and FBI jackets every time. Most days, raid looked like filing the right motion, freezing the right account, sitting across from someone who'd never been believed and saying, "No, you're not crazy. Let's document it." Late one evening, I pinned the Operation Freedom Fund paperwork to a corkboard above my desk. Next to it, I tacked up the brooch. The wire had been removed. It was just a piece of costume jewelry now, glittering quietly in the lamplight. It reminded me of what it had felt like to be both bait and blade. It also reminded me I didn't have to live in that mode forever. On a spring night, months after the sentencing, I walked along the harbor as the city lights smeared across the water like spilled paint. The air tasted like salt and possibility. I wasn't wearing a gown or a uniform, just jeans, boots, a jacket that smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. My face was bare. No bruise, no carefully staged mask. A group of young soldiers passed by, laughing too loudly, uniforms rumpled from leave. One of them bumped my shoulder, apologized automatically when he saw my age and posture. "Ma'am, sorry, ma'am." "It's fine," I said. "Enjoy your night. Watch your six." He saluted sloppily. I didn't correct him. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a woman in Texas whose husband's family had been siphoning her deployment pay. "Heard about your fund from my cousin," she wrote. "Not sure I deserve help, but I'm tired of being afraid." "You don't have to deserve it," I typed back. "You just have to want out. Let's start with what you know and what you can prove." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "Okay," she wrote. "I'm ready." I stood by the water, let the sea air fill my lungs, and felt something settle inside me. There had been a time when I thought strength meant staying quiet, enduring for the sake of peace, letting people strip me down because their titles were bigger than mine. Then there had been a night when a slap in a ballroom became a starting gun. Now, strength looked different. It looked like picking up the phone. It looked like saying no to people who thought money made them untouchable. It looked like founding something, not just surviving something. I touched my cheek, not to check for tenderness, but to remind myself of the line I'd chosen not to cross. Silence is not peace, I thought again. Endurance is not love. I turned away from the water and walked toward the office where a new file folder waited with someone else's name on it. They tried to make me background decor in their story. Instead, I became the detonation cord. And now, the one handing other people the tools to blow their cages open too.